There's this adage that people talk about, adapt or die. Actually, they say it more dramatically than that. It's adapt or die. Adapt or die. I'm definitely going to become an actor. I'm going to quit this whole YouTube thing. I'm definitely going to move to Hollywood, get discovered, make it big, become an actor, become rich and famous, and win an Oscar. Definitely. People talk about adapt or die. Basically, they're saying, if you don't adapt to the conditions or situation or your environment, you're going to die. Now, on its face, this is quite reasonable, but it's actually incorrect. And it's very subtle in the mistake, the logical mistake going on. And I'm going to explain why. You see, the adage shouldn't be adapt or die. It should be adapt or suffer relentlessly and eventually die. Now, that's very different. Because you see, if you have the adage adapt or die, the reverse means you will die if you don't adapt, right? Therefore, if I am not dead, I am adapting. I'm successfully adapting, right? That would be the logical inference from the adage adapt or die. But since the truth of the matter is you adapt or you suffer, and the suffering gets to a point where you eventually die, not such an elegant adage now, is it? But that's the truth of the matter. And so you invert that statement and you realize that if you are suffering, you are failing to adapt. This is a key insight, see? If you're not suffering, i.e. if you're flourishing, then you're successfully adapting. But if you're suffering, if you're going through a shitty period in your life where things are not going your way, and on the contrary, it seems as if every decision you're making leads further and further down the toilet, right? Well, then what's happening is that you are suffering needlessly because you are failing to adapt. If you adapt, you will cease to suffer. And that's what we want now, isn't it? If you adapt, you will not only cease to suffer, but you'll begin to flourish. And that's what you want in life. Right? Now, if you're suffering, see, you cannot expect your environment to adapt to you. Think about it. It's monstrously arrogant to think that you are this special little snowflake, the center of the universe, and the whole entire universe should adapt for your comfort. It's absurd. It's arrogant. It's crazy, quite frankly, right? It's the mistake that SJWs and leftists make, right? They are so triggered, quote unquote, by this, that, the other, and they complain about it, and they expect the rest of the world to adapt to them. And that's why, I personally find them despicable precisely because of that, because of their arrogance, because they think that they are so special that everybody else on the face of the planet should adapt to them. That's crazy talk. That's not something that you want. The other reason that so many people think that the environment should be adapting to you is because we live in a consumer society. We live in a consumer society, and so much of our lives is spent being sold to. The relationship between a seller and a client, well, what does a seller want? He wants the client to be happy, right? So the seller will do whatever is necessary to change himself in order to satisfy the customer, the client. Now, if you're the client of, say, like some social media or some shit like that, yes, of course, that particular environment where you spend so much of your time is going to adapt to you. But that's just a commercial relationship. The reality of it is most of our lives are not spent in commercial relationships. Sometimes we get confused as to what is a commercial relationship and what's the real world. A commercial relationship can make you think that the environment should change for you because the seller, the person who is trying to sell you something, whatsoever that may be, is constantly adjusting for the sake of you. But that's just a commercial relationship. It's not real life. And the problem, of course, is that so much of our society is consumer-based, consumption-based, based in that seller-client relationship that we start to confuse where one ends and the other begins. And that's why we're so miserable in certain areas of our lives, the more important areas of our lives, our personal relationships, and so content in what is a fundamentally transactional relationship with a seller, be it a video game manufacturer, a cable provider, a internet provider, internet website, social media, all this crap that eats up so much of our attention. It's not the real environment. It's not the real world. You see what I'm saying? So, if you realize that you are suffering, well, what do you have to do in order to end that suffering? What do you have to do in order to end that misery that you are experiencing? Well, you have to adapt. Now, a lot of times people avoid adapting by pursuing different strategies. For instance, they pursue distractions, video games, perpetual internet surfing, shit like that. Or they take pills, all kinds of uppers and mood-altering pills of different sorts, antidepressants, what have you. But these just palliate the symptoms of your suffering, the suffering that comes from your failure to adapt. They're not a long-term or permanent solution. Another way that people avoid adapting to their environment is claiming that the thing that makes them suffer is some sort of chronic malady. I'm autistic, or I'm a victim, or I'm whatever the fuck. They claim that this chronic condition can never be fixed, and therefore they never have to adapt. They never have to change. Again, they insist that the rest of the world change for them because they have a malady. You see, they're autistic, they're bipolar, they're a victim of rape, they're a victim of incest, they're a victim of, not getting the right fucking Happy Meal when they went to the fucking McDonald's, right? They're always a victim. And what does a victim do? He's just static. He doesn't change. He's the same thing. And so everybody else is supposed to change to accommodate the victim. This is perfectly fine with somebody who's, say, paraplegic. I mean, a guy who can't walk, right? Well, yeah, the environment, we're going to set up a few ramps here and there for the poor son of a bitch, right? But for all the other stuff, all this bullshit of being a victim of all kinds of imaginary or trivial maladies, well, what is that? Again, it's a way to avoid the hard business of adapting. Just like pills, just like distractions, it's a way to palliate, to accept and sort of like sublimate a continuous suffering without carrying forth the hard business of adaptation, of adapting, of changing. Now, like I said, why do people avoid adaptation? Well, because it's painful. Why is it painful? Well, because when you decide that you are going to adapt, when you decide that you are going to end the suffering that you are experiencing, what's the first thing you have to do? You have to look at yourself honestly. You have to look at yourself honestly and look at your flaws, your failures, the things that you are not doing properly. And you have to look at them, clear-eyed. You can't be fooling yourself. You can fool other people. That's perfectly fine to fool other people and claim this, that, the other. Say you're a victim and all this bullshit. But when you are truly wanting to adapt, you have to look at yourself and honestly admit what's wrong and start to change it. Start to change the attitudes and behaviors that you are indulging in that is making you suffer. Now, this is a hard business. Nobody's claiming otherwise, okay? And lots of times it's just easier to just put up with the suffering. It's easier to just put up with your suffering, with your misery, and you say, well, I'm not dead yet, so I must be adapting. You see? It's so much easier to just put up with the suffering, put up with the misery of your life, blame it on other people, use drugs, use video games, use whatever is necessary to ameliorate the pain and not confront it. But see, if you decide that you are going to adapt, if you decide that you're going to move forward like a man and change yourself to adapt to your environment, it's not only that you're going to end your suffering and misery. All right, that's nice, sure, but that's not it. What will happen is that you will begin to flourish. And as you adapt in one area of your life and improve that area of your life, you'll find it easier to improve and adapt in other areas of your life. You will gain the confidence to do so, to truly change and become better. Because don't let people fool you. You see, there are men who are lesser men, and there are men who are better men. And the better men are not necessarily born that way. As I've told you before, some men are born with great talent. They're like 50% of the race, right? But to get to that 100%, it doesn't matter if you were born on the 50-yard line or the 0-yard line. You can get to the 100-yard line. And the better men get to the 100-yard line not because of their innate talent, what they were born with, but because no matter how much they were born with, they still had to work it. If you adapt, you are working it, and you will get closer to being the better man, the man that you see in your mind's eye, the man who will be worth taking seriously, the man who is flourishing. That is why you have to adapt.